Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to News Toast. And okay, so the Activision Blizzard acquisition has been a wild ride, and that's probably putting it lightly here. Though, of course, we are nearing the finish line now. High five, everybody. But one of the more bewildering and amusing narratives has been Sony's reaction. They've said some things up to this point, but today they've gone off the deep end in one last-ditch effort to sway the CMA back in their direction, or maybe, I don't really know. This was a weird response from Sony, but we're going to get into all of that today. Also, some more experimental PlayStation technology has popped up online. Of course, yesterday we talked about the PlayStation Wii U-like controller. The thing's actually growing on me the more I think about it. But apparently that's not all they have planned for their growing aspirations in the controller field. As usual, though, if you're enjoying the video, do hit those buttons below. Big shout out to my patrons as well. You all are absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for your support. But we do have plenty to get into today, starting off with those Final Fantasy Pixel remasters. They are finally heading over to consoles, or at least two of them. Square Enix continues to make very strange decisions. This really should not be surprising by this point, but at the very least, the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster Collection was previously announced for PlayStation and Nintendo after being exclusively available on PC and mobile devices. Again, very strange decisions from Square Enix. They should have probably been on consoles day one, especially in my opinion for the Switch, as that is the perfect home for a collection like this. But the good news here is that we now have a date for both the Switch and PlayStation versions. They are officially slated for an April 19th release. So this is right around the corner, though. I do want to kind of expand on this topic just a little bit here. I mean, if you're a huge fan of the old classic Final Fantasy games, and if you grew up with this franchise, there might be a chance that you might want these games physically to add to your collection, or hey, maybe you want to display them on your shelf or something like that. Now, unfortunately, Square Enix has kind of botched the physical release as it's exclusive to their website. It has ridiculous shipping and handling costs. There seem to be very few copies even made, and yeah, it sold out in like mere minutes at like midnight when they stealthily put it up for pre-orders months and months back. Now, there is a chance that they will get more copies for its launch. I know there's some fans hopeful in that, so you can kind of keep an eye out for that if you want. But I also want to go ahead and key you in on the Play Asia physical release that you can pre-order right now, which is also cheaper than what it is on the Square Enix's website. Now, this is the Asian version, but it does have an English language included as well. The only thing here is that if you do pre-order it from Play Asia, it's not going to ship immediately, so don't expect it on April 19th. It might be a little bit of a wait, but I thought I'd at the very least let you all know if you do want a physical copy, because I know there was a lot of people that absolutely did, or at least until Square Enix decided to, Square Enix. In other words, another strange decision. Now, we also got a nice little update for one of last year's best games, being God of War Ragnarok. I know some of y'all may have heard about that game, just possibly, but they did just drop New Game Plus mode, so you can actually jump back in with actually also some extra content and, of course, a more grandiose challenge. It does come included with new equipment, comes included with new armor, new appearances, a new level cap, there's new enchantments, new progression paths, an expanded Niflheim arena, and they've even made some changes to the in-game bosses. That way, it makes for an even more difficult challenge to go up against them. All things considered, this is actually a really nice update, and better yet, because, well, it is completely free of charge. I mean, of course, you do have to buy the game still, but if you were craving more God of War, this is a good way to jump back in. Let's just go and get into this Activision Blizzard stuff, though, because Sony just posted a doozy of a response to the CMA's reverse stance on the console market. Originally, the CMA was looking into the console market to see if the Microsoft Activision Blizzard acquisition posed any kind of anti-competitive practices. Of course, Sony has been lobbying these regulators. Old Jim Ryan has been flying around to convince them to kind of come over to his side, claiming that Microsoft will foreclose Call of Duty. They've claimed that Microsoft will purposely degrade Call of Duty on PlayStation, and they've just been throwing out a lot of different accusations. And originally, it seemed like all that was working, or at least until last month when the CMA reported they had gotten new evidence that proved to them that Microsoft likely will not do these things as Sony claims, and that it basically alleviated their concerns with the console market. In other words, they pretty much threw out Sony's complaints while they instead focused on the cloud-based market, which is kind of where we are now. Well, as you might have guessed, Sony isn't exactly too happy about all this, and they let that be known today in a very, we'll call it a heated response. So this is actually a 10-page response in where they call out the CMA and claim that they're wrong for their decision, and then they kind of explain why. Now, we're not going to go over all 10 pages. I will leave a link in the description below in case you do want to read through that. But what we'll do here is kind of go over some of the different highlights. So they started this off right away in a very aggressive approach by saying the CMA's reversal of its position on its console's theory of harm is surprising, unprecedented, and irrational. The provisional findings assessed a significant body of evidence in the round to support its finding that Microsoft would have the ability and incentive to withhold Activision content, and that this would substantially lessen competition by foreclosing PlayStation. They then continue on to say that the addendum takes a diametrically opposite approach and focuses almost exclusively on a single economic model on which it places significantly more weight than other available evidence. That model, which is based on the lifetime value of an average gamer, is used to estimate Microsoft's incentives to make Call of Duty exclusive to Xbox. Okay, so Sony's argument is that this model that the CMA and Microsoft are currently using is flawed, which basically is that if, and that's key word here, if Microsoft made Call of Duty exclusive to Xbox, then Microsoft would substantially make less money on the Call of Duty franchise, meaning that it makes no sense to make Call of Duty exclusive, which is why the CMA kind of backed off on the console market. Sony, however, they argue that that's not actually the case here, and that the CMA underestimates the incentives Microsoft would get by making Call of Duty an Xbox exclusive. They say that in the long term, Microsoft will make even more money on Call of Duty as more users switch over to the Xbox brand. Not only would they no longer have to give a share to Sony for each purchase and microtransaction, but also users would be tied into the Xbox ecosystem, where users would buy other games for Xbox instead of PlayStation. They also, interestingly enough, use Minecraft as an example to prove their point here. Minecraft in this case has often been used as an example of Microsoft keeping a game multi-platform, but Sony actually disagrees with that as well, because they say Minecraft is a single release game that is already in users' hands, and that it does not drive anything like the level of gameplay, engagement, or purchasing decisions as Call of Duty. Which, this is kind of an odd claim, especially considering there's literally a new Minecraft set to release this very month that, yeah, by the way, is multi-platform. Minecraft is not a single release game, as Sony claims. There's been multiple versions since its original release to bring it over to new platforms, new generations of consoles, which includes, yes, PlayStation, actually even the PlayStation Vita. And on top of that, Microsoft has also made its spin-offs multi-platform as well, including Minecraft Dungeons, Minecraft Legends, which is releasing later this month, and even Minecraft Story Mode. So to claim it's a single release game is factually wrong. Once again, it just kind of feels like Sony is throwing everything they possibly can at this case in the hopes that something will stick. And this is all while ignoring the fact that Microsoft has already offered Sony a 10-year contract to ensure Call of Duty will remain multi-platform, which they refuse to sign. That's where it becomes evident that Sony's arguments are disingenuous at best. Everybody, including them, knows that Call of Duty will remain multi-platform, and I think that the CMA has caught on to that as well. There's just too much evidence by this point that proves this. Microsoft has already signed several contracts, whether that be with Nintendo, they've signed a contract with Nvidia, they sent a contract to Valve, they trust each other, so they didn't actually sign it. They've signed a contract with several cloud-based platforms, and they've also sent a contract to Sony. So, I mean, yes, it's very evident that they want to keep this multi-platform. It's just another argument from Sony made in bad faith. Sony's just being stubborn about this because they need something to try to stop this acquisition, but they are going to go ahead and stick with this argument to the very end, which also includes the idea that Microsoft will purposely degrade the PlayStation version. This is what Sony claims. If PlayStation received a degraded version of Call of Duty, it would seriously damage our reputation. Our gamers would desert our platforms in droves, and network effects would exacerbate the problem. Our business would never recover. Yeah, so that is quite the dramatic reaction, straight from Hollywood right there. But they're basically saying that PlayStation would die if Xbox gets a better version of Call of Duty than PlayStation, which, first off, is absolutely ridiculous. If you wouldn't know better, the way Sony is playing the victim here, You would think that there's some small, tiny company in the game industry rather than the market leader by far. But even more so in how ironic this response is. I mean, we've talked about this time and time again, but Sony literally pays Activision to get the better version of Call of Duty. I mean, Sony wants to make content parity a big issue in this case, but they themselves have been locking down Call of Duty exclusive content for years. So with that in mind, are they saying that was to make sure the Xbox business would never recover? Because the argument can go both ways. It is what it is, I guess, though. But nonetheless, Sony continues to say that due to this projected degradation of the PlayStation version, Call of Duty players will switch over to Xbox because, in their words, Call of Duty gamers are passionate, knowledgeable, and here's the one that gets me, sophisticated. They continue on to say that gamers engage with each title in a franchise immediately after its release, are keenly aware of the game's price, quality, and features, and regularly compare the quality, performance, and features of their favorite games across PlayStation and Xbox. So yeah, that's one way to describe Call of Duty players. Sony really is bringing out all the big boy arguments today. But truth is, I would be surprised if any of this sways the CMA. It's basically the same argument they've been making pretty much since day one. But let me know what you all think about this response. Do you think that Call of Duty players are sophisticated? Do you think that Call of Duty players will swap consoles in droves? Do you think that the PlayStation business will never recover if Xbox gets the better version of Call of Duty? Let me know what you all think about some of Sony's claims in the comments below. Now, speaking of Sony, though, a rather interesting patent surfaced online that Sony is still looking to further advance their controller technology. This has been a big emphasis for them this generation. Their DualSense controller brings a lot of new, interesting features to the table, such as its haptic feedback and adaptive triggers, but it appears that they're not resting on their laurels. They want to try to push the boundaries even further, and you can see that here in their new patent simply titled Controller. So in this patent, it describes a controller that would use a softer material than their typical plastic that they currently use, and that this new material could be elastically formable and would connect to a circuit that processes information. Now, where this gets really interesting, though, is that the controller would be able to electrically change temperatures. So, hypothetically, let's just go and say that you're playing God of War Ragnarok. Maybe you're playing that new Game Plus mode we talked about earlier, and then you walk into one of its snowy regions. Well, through this new technology, they can make the controller feel cold, mimicking the environment around you. The same could be said if you're around a hotter environment. Maybe you're in a desert. Maybe the controller starts to warm up then. They could basically mimic that temperature. Now, I'm sure there's some other unique ways that you could use this feature as well, but the idea is to further immerse yourself in the world. Now, honestly, though, as cool as this feature sounds on paper, when it comes to just your typical standard console games, I don't really see this as being all that impactful. Some might even find it uncomfortable. But where I could actually see this technology being more intriguing is in the VR space. VR is all about tricking your mind into believing you're actually there, and by mimicking your environment and how objects feel in your hand, the temperature around you, things like that, that's where I could actually see some benefits of a technology like this. I think that could be very interesting to play around with. So I do think that this idea fits the VR space better, but let me know what you all think about this. Do you think it's interesting or not? Let's go take a look at the poll of the day, though, and with Nintendo kind of teasing a new Mario announcement for a future Direct, I wanted to ask you all, do you prefer Mario 2D or 3D games? And as you can see here, the majority of you all being 61% voted for Mario 3D, where 30% of you all voted for Mario 2D. Now, several of you all did mention that you enjoy both the 2D and 3D games, and I mean, for good reason. They are both great in their own ways. But I am with the majority here. I do prefer the 3D iterations, and I think Sean explained exactly why I feel that way. As you can see here, he says, I like both, but every time a new 3D Mario game comes out, it always feels like something big and new somehow. Paradoxically, the least innovative one is probably Galaxy 2, which is somehow the most well-regarded, but still, the 2D games, much as I love the series, can sometimes feel samey. And yeah, I couldn't have described it better myself. I think when it comes to 3D games, there's a lot more innovation there, and you don't know what to necessarily expect, as they do try new and interesting things. So yeah, great explanation by Sean. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. But if you like the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.